Now we're going to set the door in the opening, and the person on the inside is going to center it on the paint lines inside the opening after we set the door in. And then from the outside, Conrad is going to go ahead and put a screw in the header of this brick mold to adjust as I adjust the door on the inside. Now I've still got the plastic on the inside, and you can't see me, but I can see the margins on the top of the door. We'll look at that here in a minute. Now we'll have to adjust the door, and once we get the doors even at the top, in the middle, then Conrad can throw a screw in. You're in good shape. Go. We're going to go ahead and adjust this door and get it even in the center. So what we want to do is get this as even as possible on the top. Now once that's done, we're going to come back inside and we're going to remove this plate. Now this plate was installed on the door at ProVia before it was shipped because there was not a deadbolt in this door system. If you're receiving deadbolt and lock set, then the deadbolt will be installed. That plate will not be in place. Once we've got to this point, we're going to remove the plastic off of the doors. We remove the plastic off of the doors not by cutting around it or anything, but we want to remove it so we can see it very nicely. What we suggest doing is going ahead and removing the screws out of the hinge, one hinge at a time, and then just raising the plastic up and then replacing the hinge. You also notice that when we open this door system, out rolled this dowel rod. That dowel rod helps us space the bottom of the door away from that threshold for shipping. So again, just trying to protect the door as best we can. When getting the door in the opening, first thing we want to check is the plane of the doors. We want this jamb and this jamb on the same plane. These doors are the plane. So wherever this jamb goes, this door goes. Wherever this jamb goes, this door goes. And to check that, we're going to just open up the door a smidge, and you can see the margin from the top decreasing as it goes to the bottom here. So Conrad is going to use that margin and do that check all the way through the installation. But first, before we start anything else, we're going to get this thing on plane. To do that, he's going to have to make some adjustments out in the frame. He's got a couple screws through the brick mold, so now we're just making some fine adjustments here to make up for that. Now this is critical to get the seals at the bottom to seal up correctly and the seal at the top and the center to seal up correctly. These doors are out of plane, just like with that little sample, things are going the wrong direction. They're going away from each other, so we want to make sure that they're on plane very well. Very important part of the installation. Remember that in this process, that plane of the jambs are exceedingly important. We need to correct this at the very front of the installation. After the door is installed, there's very little you can do to correct it except for pull everything apart and re-hang the door in the opening. Just remember that whenever you're putting these screws in, don't be afraid to pull one back out and reapply one. Make sure things are right before you go further. Every one of our doors comes out with a bag of screws that are in the installation box. There are 4 screws in here that go into the hinge locations. 2 in the top hinge, 1 in the center hinge, and 1 in the bottom hinge are left open. These screws are to be put in conjunction with shims behind those locations on both doors. So you're going to have 8 of those here. In addition to that, we have a label that's over top of that top hinge. That label is to indicate where those screws go. Now the thing that Conrad's going to start with though is a smooth shank screw. As opposed to one of the all-thread screws, he's going to have a smooth shank screw here that he's going to put in the top as an adjuster. So he'll put a screw through here, through that top location as an adjuster to pull that door up. Now note what we're doing here is pulling these doors from an inside position like this up. So we're putting them up, and we're going to do it on both sides. Once he gets this one, see that's a little bit higher than that one now. When he puts this screw in, it's going to pull that door up just a little bit further. As he's putting that screw in the top, he's pulling them up, but those bottoms are still going to be spread apart. So as soon as he's clear there, you can see in the bottom. Remember, the top screws are in tension, so you're pulling these back that way. The bottom screws, the bottom hinges are in compression, so the doors are leaning down on them. To overcome that, you have to shim at the bottom locations to roll that door back together. Now this is a process that may have to be repeated again as we're proceeding through the installation. What the goal here is to get the margin between the two doors down to that 3/16 to an 1/8 thickness. So what he's going to do is continue to walk this door together. He'll put shims in the bottom, shim it over. He may pull those screws back and let them float out a little bit further. Bring them in a little bit further, shim them in. So now he's going to bring these doors together, but you have to walk them through the top. Notice we're working on the 4 corners of the door. We're not messing with the center hinges at all, just the 4 corners of the door. The plane is already correct. Notice he also checks the plane as he works through this process. Whenever you put a screw in, whenever you put a shim in, you check your margins and you check your plane. Slight adjustments are very important. Don't make big adjustments, very small adjustments. This is complicated because on that center door we have surface mounted strike plates. Those surface mounted strike plates on this astragal create a little bit more of a gap between the edge of the astragal and the edge of the door. So the margin here is critical to get it as tight as possible, the edge of that active door to the edge of this to the edge of the strike plate. Throwing the bolt, making sure everything flows in nicely to the pocket. Continue to monitor the plane of this door all the way through the installation. We're going to come back later after we're done with all this and go ahead and lightly shim those center hinges so we don't pull things out of whack when we put those screws in. Now notice what he's looked at here. He just looked at these top margins. Above this hinge, above that hinge, below this hinge, and below that hinge. These need to be true. If these are depressed at the top, pulled together on either side, we have a problem with how we've mounted the shims in to the door system. Maybe we haven't put enough shim, maybe we haven't pulled those in enough. That should be a straight margin. Once he's got his top shims in these doors, then we can go ahead and pull those center screws out, the smooth shank screws out, and go ahead and install the all thread screws that we ship with the package. The screws that we ship with the package are 2 1/4 by number 10 screws. We don't like to put screws through shims. So the screw location here will be above and below the shim. And in this area here, we want to keep that, we don't want to put a screw through the shim because it makes it hard to adjust the shim. So a lot of adjusting goes on with this door. Notice every time he puts a screw in, every time he puts a shim in, he's checking his margins. Again, keeping it as tight as possible in the center of that door system. Our new astragal does a couple things. We've added a fin here in this location to help support and keep air infiltration and water infiltration from penetrating and coming through. That's helped us in testing. In addition to this, this is a single activator bolt. So it all comes off of this flip lever here in the center. Notice that bottom of the moves. So it'll come down and seal against the threshold, but it's spring loaded, as is the pin spring loaded. So these are spring loaded independently to move as you close it and make a seal on the bottom. In addition to that, when it's thrown, the top is also spring loaded. So it'll move into place and you don't have to worry about over torquing this lever. When this lever is thrown, you'll see that it holds in place very nicely. So this single activator does a nice job of helping the customer get these bolts thrown correctly. Okay, we're going to shim the top header down. Now all the way along this top header, you can make these shim locations. Now note that your adjustment of all the doors came from putting screws through the shims. The header going across here is just trim with weather stripping in it. So adjust the margin of this header all the way across with shims in screws. Wherever you put a shim, put a screw. If you need to add a screw in this location, or a shim in this location, or this location, adjust this margin to make it look nice. But one thing we're concerned about when we're making the adjustments, as he's making here now, is this margin here and margin across that, top of the other hinge, and the margin down this astragal. Right now we've finished our installation. We've got our shims and locations all the way around the perimeter of the door. All the margins look very good. So we're happy with the final installation of this. Please keep in mind the plane of those doors, the doors going in and out, were fixed in the front of the installation. The shimming done here has adjusted the other margins around it. Notice this margin in the center of the door is also very uniform, and that's what we're shooting for, is getting the margin in the center of this door uniform. Also at the very top, we have uniform margins at the top above the frame location, above the hinge locations. With the strike plate adjustment on this, when you go to strike plate adjustment, the locks will come, the deadbolts will be installed in the door, the dummy deadbolt and this deadbolt will be installed in the door. It's installed now. We've went ahead and adjusted this deadbolt so it throws nicely, and then the lock set is installed. To install the hardware and adjust it so it closes well, we're looking at these latches. These are surface mounted plates. They're on top of this so they project out from it. But behind here are screws that allow this plate to float quite a bit. So it'll move in and out. So all you have to do to adjust it is move it and tighten down your screws, and you're adjusted